this is really, really exciting.
Yeah.
Thomas should be hiding around somewhere in the chat here. So he's the main man this evening because these are all his wines. So nothing very much to do with me. And Alex is playing Tech Guru at the moment, so he will be joining us momentarily. But I think the first thing that we need to do is make sure, a very warm welcome to everyone. I'm really excited that everybody's here. But number two, we need to get wine number one in the glass because we're here for a wine tasting, not a wine lecture or seminar. So as always, once we get up and running, we're going to let Tom talk through the wines. We've got a list of questions and we're going to grill him about all things wine. So he can tell us everything we need to know. But it's your tasting, so make sure either ask the questions, pop it into the chat, and we can go from there.
No.
How are we doing, Alex? We good over there?
Repeat so you can hear people.
Yeah, that would be good. Oh, look at this. It's all getting techie. Look at this. But I think this is probably the point to introduce Thomas Holt, who is the winemaker and the man who does all these things. So I will hand over to Thomas to start introducing the winery, the wines, and what we're going to be doing this evening, if that's okay. So welcome, Tom.
Thank you very much. It's nice to meet. I've never met you before, so we're doing this all for the first time. So thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of the online wine tasting club. It's a fantastic initiative that you guys are doing, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it. And I hope that I am bringing a little bit of fun to this week. I mean, today seems to be a difficult day to be having fun, but I've been doing phonics with my son all day, so this is definitely a highlight for me. We're starting, I'd like to start all my tastings with wine in the glass as quickly as possible. All my stories sound a lot better if you have a glass of wine in your hand. We're going to start with Paso-Primero Blanco. That's what it looks like in the bottle. Wine number one, hopefully. Hopefully you've had it in the fridge or out on the step or whatever it is. Yeah, it's quite cold out there tonight. I guess the format is for me to talk a little bit about this wine and then we'll delve into the story afterwards. Is that the right thing to do?
I think that's the way. Let's get drinking some wine, talk about the wine, and really, we're a big believer. It's everybody who's on this tasting. It's their tasting, so we find out what questions they want to ask. We've got a few questions to chuck at you, but it's about having a drink and having some fun.
I'm into that. So the first white is a blended white. I struggle a little bit with starting a tasting with a blended wine because we have gone into the realms of single variety wines. I've got to stop saying varietal. Thanks to the Australians and the Californians, the people who flipped the wine world on its head about 20 odd years ago. Because people now think that, my parents' era, they still go into the pub, the restaurant, and order wine based on dry, medium, or sweet. They pigeonhole the whole world of wine down to those three categories. We've stepped on a little bit, but now we seem to pigeonhole the whole world of wine into Malbec, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay. That's how we buy wines. That's how people expect wines to come. But that, a Sauvignon Blanc from France versus a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand are two very different beasts. But the one thing that seems to always slip through the cracks is a blended wine. A lot of people seem to think it's the kitchen sink wine, the ends of wines that you've tried to turn into single variety wines that have been mixed together to produce volume. But for me, this wine is better because of the three grapes involved coming together. We will talk about where I am, but I'm in the north of Spain. And so I think these three grapes individually where I am don't work with the vintages I've had. So I also think it's a nice way into a blended white because I think you can taste the three grapes very distinctly. Well, I certainly can. And for the first wine, I'm going to talk you through it. So I'm going to lead you down the garden path, and invariably you'll all agree with me because that's how these things work when someone tells you what you should be tasting. But obviously, on the nose first, I'm hoping that what you're getting is quite a floral, aromatic wine, quite a pronounced nose, sort of looking towards rose petally, and maybe some citrus flowers on the nose, but certainly edging toward lychee, And these are starting to turn into the hallmarks of Gewürztraminer, which is one of the key components of this wine. Obviously grown predominantly in Alsace. I grew it a little bit in Canada, and very unusual in Spain, but probably the grape that put my region, or my adopted region, on the map a few years ago. And so hopefully lots of bright floral aromatics on the nose. And then when you try the wine, probably a little bit more weight to the wine than the nose is leading you to believe in, or leading you to expect, I should say. And a real burst of sort of honeyed tropical fruits. That's Chardonnay. Chardonnay is the workhorse grape in my blends, bringing the two outliers together. I really like Chardonnay from where we are. I mean, I'm to the manor born with Chardonnay anyway. It grows everywhere, so everyone has their version of it. But I'm a sucker for it. I absolutely love all versions of it. And for me, I really like the honeyed nature, which it makes it feel like it's an aged wine. Makes it feel like it's got a bit of age to this white. Maybe that it's had a bit of maturation, but this is a very lean, very linear wine. That's just the style of Chardonnay that we get from Somontano. But then I think after that richness, you need some lift of acidity. You need something to come through and bring the palate forwards, particularly if it's going to be the first wine of the tasting, first wine of the evening. And we get some acidity from Riesling in this case. So hopefully that brings the tasting profile back round to citrus fruits, cleans the palate up, cleans the direction of the wine up. And I think that's what makes this wine really good for when we go to a restaurant, when we go to a pub, we tend to have a glass of something whilst we're perusing the menu. And I think what you need from that drink, whatever it may be, is something that's going to cut through all the tea and the coffee and whatever else you've had beforehand, and clean the palate up ready for whatever you're going to eat or drink thereafter. I think this wine is particularly good at that. It is really refreshing, really vibrant, some power, some weight, but not too much. It's not overbearing. You could carry on having this with perhaps some Thai curries or some spice or some falafels or something in those sorts of ballparks. But it's not going to prevent you from having something else afterwards. You know, this doesn't dictate your night. And when I was doing these tastings in the summer, this was my recommendation for a wine in the fridge for when you fired up the barbecue. And in England, we invariably start drinking a lot earlier than we probably should do. And you want a wine that's clean, fresh, direct, and isn't going to be too offensive at 10:30 in the morning when you've lit the coals. So this is my starting point for every tasting, and quite a few meals as well. So I hope you agree. Nice, clean, fresh, bright, vibrant, young. This I can't see many people, so I don't know if that's. I'm scared to touch anything else in case I turn myself off. But that's Paso-Primero Blanco, 2019.
No, absolutely. And I think this, as we mentioned, absolutely fantastic aperitif wine. But then if we're looking for food, maybe something Asian, something spicy, I think it's a really, really great wine for that kind of style. Look, it's this guy.
Hi all.
Hi, all.
This is the first one we've done from the winery with a traditional Zoom format rather than us being the sort of webinar, and we hadn't quite thought around the practicalities of how a microphone would pick up what you're all saying and what Thomas is saying and make an echo. So anyway, I'm looking forward to opening wine number one as well. But
You need to catch up.
Catch up time, yeah.
But perfect. As we get wine number two in the glass, Thomas, did you want to give us a bit of a run through of what got you into winemaking? And also it's the fact that it's not a particularly common career in this country. And is it something, you know, friends and family looked at you and went, why are you going to do this?
Well, it's something that's I try and remind people of. I've got no family links to wine. I've got no money. So the two typical routes into wine were not available to me. I've got even less money now, which is, so I wouldn't recommend it as a profession.
So buy some wine then, apparently.
I do have more friends though, so something's worked out well. But it's definitely not a traditional path. Certainly from Shrewsbury, which is where I'm beaming into your homes from. There's even less opportunities to get into wine. But there's a few turns of luck in my story of how all of this panned out. And I think the first point of luck was I was studying geology at Birmingham University, which people do take links from and think that there is a link between geology and wine, and there is, but I am not that link. I was not a good geologist. I was studying in the loosest sense of the word, thoroughly enjoying my time in Birmingham. Politely asked to leave the course by the head lecturer because I was contributing nothing to the science. And I had to go home to live with my parents, and took the first job that was coming because I had to pay my way. And I am from Shrewsbury, and in Shrewsbury there is a wine merchant called Tanner's Wines, who I knew about.
Wine merchants in the country.
Oh, well, it's just phenomenal. I knew they existed, obviously, but I had never been in my 20 years at that point, and went in as a shelf stacker, floor cleaner. And within 2 weeks, I was involved in a staff tasting of Aussie Duress wines, starting at about 50 quid a bottle, going up to 250 quid a bottle, of which I hated all of them. They all tasted like a barnyard door. I was not into it at all. But bearing in mind, at that point, wine to me was 3 for a tenner from Tesco's, Banrock Station. And that's if I was feeling like I was splashing out and entertaining for the evening. So wine was really not on my radar at all, but it came out of nowhere, completely blindsided me. And thanks to the efforts that Tanner's put into training me up, and if anyone's ever been, it's a living museum. Part of the building is from the 1400s, and the wine merchant's been on site for nearly 200 years. It's a ridiculous place. I was very lucky to be there and experience the full world. Did the full did level 2 up to level 2 WSET very, very quickly, and they've got something like 1,500 different wines on the shelves. We were trying a different bottle every day, and I just fell in love with it. I'm a beer drinker. I'd probably drink more beer than I should, but I've never been stopped in my tracks by a beer in the same way that I have by wine. Constantly amazed by the flavors available, styles available, and what it adds to eating and drinking and hanging out with friends. Didn't fall in love with shelf stacking and sweeping floors. I found out that there was a course to study wine production. All roads in the UK lead to Plumpton at some point, whether it's for the full 3 years or for a day and a half at some point. And Tanner's were, read into this what you will, Tanner's were very encouraging of my decision to go and study winemaking at Plumpton. They helped me leave. They helped me, I carried on working at Tanner's in my breaks, but went off and started the viticulture and enology program at Plumpton. And it just cemented everything that I was discovering. It was a very exciting course. I love living in Brighton as much as I love being at Plumpton, I have to say. It was good. I had some great friends. But for anyone who doesn't know about Plumpton, it's the standard bearer of UK wine production, of education anyway, where you do everything from picking grapes, the harvest is the starting point, right through to studying we were twin with the University of Champagne in my final year, and went over to study the nucleation points of bubbles in a glass, and did a whole grapevine morphology. It was just stuff that I haven't used since as well, to be honest, because it gives everyone the opportunity to find their feet. And that's what I loved about it. If you wanted to go and study yeast development in a lab, or if you wanted to go and learn how to broker wine on the Hong Kong exchanges, or everything, you could find your rhythm in it. And mine was definitely living and working in a cellar, and that was what I wanted to do, and that gave me the platform to go off and find the next step. The next step for me was to leave England. So I know I'm looking to 2 people in a winery within England. So my choice to leave is not a reflection on the English wine industry at all.
We often don't use English grapes, so
and we often think about leaving.
We've been researching for a Wines of Spain tasting that we're doing next week, which hopefully we'll see a few of the people from tonight on as well. And we've just fallen absolutely in love with some of these little places that you discover and the food and the tradition and just how surprising it all is. So yeah, we definitely empathise with that. And I could just say also about Plumpton, which is it sounds like something from a 1950s kids TV program, doesn't it? But it's sat nestled behind the South Downs, and it is absolutely beautiful. And it's got this campus and this specialist wine education building, which has got a grass roof, and it had some amazing people. Presumably you were sort of taught by Chris Voss and
Oh yeah,
the like,
absolutely.
yeah.
I swear by it. I mean, it does feel like a different world now, and I've since been back to Plumpton, and it is a different world there from when I was there. And it's not that long ago that I was there, but it's become a real bastion of wine education within the world. And as English wine has improved and English wine standing in the world has improved, so has Plumpton. And I'd recommend it to absolutely everyone who was interested in that slightly more practical approach to wine. It was it was glorious. And I met my two best friends, and that we just had an absolute riot.
Fantastic. So where was it you first decided to go off and live the dream as a travelling winemaker?
Well, I'd spent 3 years making wine in England, and I hadn't had the most success in doing that, and loved Plumpton, loved what we were doing, but had this desire to go traveling and see a bit of the world, and wine was my ticket at that point. And I really thought that there was an opportunity for me to use it, to leverage it, and find a way. Sorry, I'm opening some more wine.
If anyone wants to open wine number 2, of course, go crazy.
I have.
You has.
I had met someone at Tanner's. A good friend of mine had become more than a good friend in my last year of Plumpton, and I was about ready to move on. And I said, I want to go somewhere. And she said, well, I want to go somewhere too. Would you fancy going to New Zealand? And we'd never lived together. We'd never spent much more time together than a couple of evenings. And we both said, let's go to New Zealand. And we booked we found a winery that was prepared to offer me a harvest stint in Hawke's Bay, North Island of New Zealand. And so we bought tickets, we packed everything up, and we rolled the dice and gambled on each other, gambled on this stint. She didn't have an offer of work. I only had an offer of 10 weeks work. And we off we went. We went to New Zealand. It was about as far away from home as we could imagine, making completely different styles of wine to what we'd worked with before. So as opposed to the ubiquitous sparkling wine that we were making in the UK, we were off with Malbecs and Cabernet Sauvignons and Merlots and Syrahs, and we were suddenly thrust into the world of making wine in Hawke's Bay, and we had no money, we had nothing to put to our name at all, and we knew we had employment for those 10 weeks, but nothing past that. And this is the second big hit of luck where they actually had a very bumper harvest, and for the first time ever they decided to keep one of their cellar hands on past the harvest itself. And in my first professional job, I was offered a full-time role. And so I don't really know quite the crowd I'm talking to. Obviously you guys in my screen know all about this, but for anyone who doesn't know, the wine world does have a lot of jobs going during harvest, and it's very easy to travel the world quite quickly, and you go and work for the harvest and then you move on to the next region. You can do 2, 3, maybe even 4 regions in a year if you work really hard and really fast, but you get really good at processing fruit. That's your job. You get really good at seeing the fruit come from the vineyard, and you turn it into juice and you set it off fermenting, and then you leave and move on to the next place. And it's it's a skilled job, but it's not very varied. You get really good at filtering lees, or there's specific roles that you become really good at. And so for my first job to be turned into a full-time position where I got to take those grapes. I didn't realize at the time, I was only looking back that I realized how important this was. But I got to follow those grapes, the first grapes that I'd ever received as a professional cellar hand, and put them all the way through to bottle. And I was not making the decisions at that point. I was merely the labourer, but I was involved in all of it. And that was a really amazing start for me in my career to actually be involved in everything that happened to those wines. There wasn't a wine that left that cellar for nearly 2 years that didn't go through my hands at some point. And it accelerated what I was up to. It was phenomenally exciting. And I, again, we were so lucky. We had such a good time. We'd probably still be there, but we were probably a bit young for Hawke's Bay. It's a little bit like England's. It's Hawke's Bay to New Zealand is Eastbourne to the UK. It's relatively quiet. It's a relatively advanced population in age, shall we say. And it was very quiet, very, very quiet. And we perhaps wanted a little bit more life. When we were out there, my brother was in London, and it was the London riots. I don't know if anyone can remember back then. It seems like a lifetime ago. But that during those riots, the lead story on the New Zealand 6 o'clock news was the fact that the All Blacks rugby jersey was $5 more expensive than the previous year. And that was what they led the news with. It was,
before we get onto where your next steps were, I think quite a few people are on to wine number 2. So unlike it says in our tasting notes, these are both Chardonnay region Gewürztraminer blends. Now, I suppose 2 questions. These aren't the grapes we associate with Spain. You think of Riojas, Tempranillo, you think of Garnacha. Yeah, exactly. And not of these grapes which grow in France for Chardonnay and places like the Alsace. And so how do they grow? And also, how do you make 2 completely different wines out of the same blends of grapes?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I realise I'm talking. I need to trim my responses. First of all, one of the benefits of the region I'm in is also one of the main problems with the region that I am in that it doesn't have a strong identity, and it's got a long history of growing grapes, peasant wine for hundreds and hundreds of years, where people grew grapes simply to provide the people who were tending the fields with wine as payment. Grapes grow really well there, but the area doesn't have an identity beyond being a really good area for growing grapes. When they found Gewürz worked and that hit a chord with a lot of people, and they realized that gave them an opportunity to stand out from the rest of Spain, they went a little bit mad with what varieties they can plant. And that's one of the reasons why we're there, because we can make international variety wines from Spain. So we have that dual excitement of being able to put Spain on the bottle and have an international varietal that people are comfortable with. So we actually have options for quite a few different grapes. We have 14 different varieties that can be grown in Somontano, which changes a little bit year on year. It's one of the only DOs that allows that. So that's why we have these grapes that people have heard of, but I haven't heard of them from Spain, if that makes any sense. And it's given me an opportunity, and perhaps the first few years of the business were very business minded rather than wine minded, in terms of I need to build a business I had no money, I had nothing to launch the company, I needed the wines to sell. So we built it from wines that we believed we could put in front of people. And so these blends are the various versions of those thought processes of trying to make a wine that we think the English market would get behind. So that's.
I mean, how do you stop them from massively over ripening? Because we always talk in our tastings about how Chardonnay loves the cooler climate, and especially when you talk about the north of France and Germany for some of these more aromatic varieties, and you bombard it with. And we all know how hot the south of Spain is, but is it quite the same up in the sort of foothills of the Pyrenees?
It's an absolute nightmare, and I think it's a constant battle that we lost in some years and are hopefully winning slowly. The the rise in alcohol is the biggest issue that we face, and obviously that, you know, we spike in alcohol before we've managed to pick up the flavors that we want, which is why the reds are, you know, we're pushing close to 15% on all our reds. I think what we've discovered is the biggest problem is the way that the grapes have been cultivated over the last 10, 15 years. Obviously, the climate situation is not working in our favor, but I think the fact that the growers that we have worked with in the past have been working on a euro per bunch ratio, that's been our biggest issue, rather than the you know, with that legacy of bulk wine growing is a big problem in the whole of Spain, and it's a traditionally, or a widely accepted approach to how vines should be cultivated. We're moving away from it. We've started the process of becoming organic. We have biodynamic tendencies, but not we're not fully committed in any way, shape, or form. But that approach of farming the soil rather than the vine is something that we're working hard on. And in the long term, that's what will help us against the ripeness. We haven't won that battle in the last 4 years. There's no two ways about it. But the easiest solution we have in the cellar is we make a lot of wines. So even in our first couple of years where we only released 2 wines, we would process 18 different, we'd process small batches from vineyards, and we'd be picking every day for 4, 5, 6 weeks to get as much range as possible in flavor, acidity, sugars, the whole 9 yards. And that's cellar complexity. It's a labor of love. It's certainly not an efficient way of doing things. And even when we made our first red wine, there was tanks and barrels and things all over the cellar. And that was the solution to the problem. Pick early, have acidity, but too much greenness, and then pick throughout the season to try and balance yourself out. And that is still how we do it now.
Fantastic. So what are the sort of the biggest differences between wines 1 and 2? We've also got a couple of questions about whether they're your own vines or whether you're sort of like a cooperative, bring in from different growers, and whether you sell any locally in Spain as well.
Well, selling Spanish wine to Spaniards as a long-haired Englishman is a very difficult task. So we have slowly started to creep into the Spanish market, but not with any great shakes, I have to admit. That's a project. We'll get there. The Spanish wine market is a very interesting. It's a whole 2 hours we could chat about the way the Spaniards buy wine. The easiest thing.
I mean, you're unlike us, aren't you? Because you do all of the processing and the fermentation, the aging, and the bottling as well in Spain.
Yeah, absolutely. We're a DO wine, so there's regulations behind what the wine has to enter from grape and leave in a bottle. Those are the that's essentially there's some quality controls in the middle of that, but we have to do everything on site. So I'm out in Spain as often as I can. I've had 6 flights cancelled by Ryanair this in the last 2 weeks, so we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But essentially, the way that I make my wines is I have a parent winery. When we set off to discover Spain, we had a place in mind where we wanted to go, and we believed that we could find a place that would be prepared to let me work for them and use their kit and infrastructure after hours, perhaps that virtual winemaking role that is so common in New Zealand and Canada where we went, not common in Spain. It took us a long time to find a home, find someone who believed in what we were trying to do. And eventually we did. We found a family winery who'd been growing grapes for a long time, but only recently had a winery. And we managed to convince them that we knew what we were doing, that we had a plan for making wine. To start off with, it was making wine for the English market with a hope of, expanding beyond that eventually. We wanted someone that had all the kit and infrastructure and would let me go and work within those confines to make my wines. It took a long time to find. When we found it, we found a family that was really behind everything that we were about. And in year 1, it was very much me in my corner. I was able to source some fruit from their vineyards that I was able to work with to turn into our first red wine. But then over the last 6 years, I'm we're part of the same family. We make all our wines together. There's no separation of duty at harvest. All we do is we make the best wines we can, and then slowly over time we say, well, this is going to be Paso, this is going to be your wines, and we help each other out. There's no there's not me buying fruit or tanks, or we're all under the same umbrella. It's very muddled. It's very Spanish in that sort of, we've never written anything down on a contract or signed anything. It was all done in long dinners with multiple bottles of wine. And every time I go, it gets longer and the discussions get bigger and there's more, we're taking over more territory, and between us, we're having a lot more fun with it as well. But that's how it works. And it's difficult to explain because in England, we have this beautiful idea of, you have a cellar in the middle of concentric circles of vines, and that's what you should have if you want to be a winery owner. It's not possible. I got no money. I launched a company.
For those who don't know, setting up your own winery, aside from the buildings and permissions and finding the right way to deal with all of the byproducts and the water that you need and all of these kind of things, it is many hundreds of thousands of pounds by the time you start getting into temperature controlled fermentation tanks, and you can spend as much as you like really, but if you're Mark Driver down in East Sussex, you spend many millions.
Which I don't have.
So I feel my point on this call is to stop you two getting too wine geeky. So what I think we need to do is we probably need to do a quick summary of wine number 2, flavour profile, what you might have it with. There's some great things on here saying that it works really well with cheese. Because
it's
the next wine pairing looks a bit mental to me. Bacon frazzles.
Oh, that's the rosé. We'll
the
get
next
to
one
that.
when we get next, exactly. So I'm excited to get there. So we need to get through wine number 2.
So wine number 2, as quick as I can, is Paso-Prima from 2019. Paso-Prima is a project where we don't have a set wine that we make. We just make the wine that speaks to us, or is the wine that's most reflective of the vintage within which we made it. 16 was a Chardonnay, 17 Garnacha Cabernet. 19 was this. We were under the cosh. We had to process our white vineyards. We had a rain event coming, so it was either get all the Gewurz, Riesling, and Chardonnay in at the same time, or pick something and then see how the fruit was going to react to the rain event. We made the decision that we would pick everything at the same time and process it all together. This is called a field blend. We'd never done it before. And it was not something that it wasn't a decision we took lightly, but we processed all the juice at the same time, and then we sent the juice into different fractions. So I'm a big believer in concrete tanks. We use a bit of stainless steel predominantly for keeping that linear, tight, very fruit focused approach to the wines. But we actually put some of this to some puncheons. Brand new French oak puncheons, which are 500 litres. So you get less of an impact of the oak flavour. And because we were fermenting in them, that drops the impact of the oak even further. But it gives it that real real weighty structure. And that's why I think this is a really good wine for cheese. White wine, better with cheese than red wine. That's another topic for another...
controversial.
I kind of agree. People go, wine and cheese goes together, but there's as many cheeses as there are wines. So it really depends what you're having.
100%.
Yeah, I think
the process dials back the Gewurz a little bit, so it's not quite as floral, aromatic as the first wine. It's much broader on the palate in terms of the flavour profile, but not in weight. And hopefully what you're getting is a lot more length, a lot more complexity on this white. Whereas the house wines, which all have the adder on the front, they're all everyday drinking wines for consumption in everyday circumstances. This is probably a wine that you could spend a little bit more time pontificating over and strolling into the cold winter evening, navel gazing.
I think it's delicious. It's a really cracking wine, and we were very lucky. We got these into process and put into the pouches before they even had a label. Which the labels are quite often they're designed by your wife.
Well, they
from
are
Paso-Prima.
now.
Yeah.
We had
Okay.
the Primas were always done by different artists because it's a one-off wine. The name stays, but the varieties change, the style of the wines change. So we had a different artist do the labels every time. And between 17 and 19, my wife discovered that she could paint and discovered all these different talents. And so she's now artist in chief and a lot cheaper.
Brilliant. So I think we're moving on to the rosé or rosado, as it's probably more technically correct term, and this is Merlot, which
So-
there's not
No one likes Merlot.
no one likes Merlot,
And you can't drink rosé in January, and
and it's got to be from Provence,
it's got to be from Provence.
made by a celebrity.
So why this?
This is. I mean, no one wants 2020 in a glass, but this is 2020 in a glass to me. This is the absolute runaway success. The thing that got me through last year. There's a backstory. I know I'm taking up everyone's Friday evenings with my witterings, but we had Paso-Primero, Tinto, and Blanco to start off with, our red and whites. And people like a set in the UK. People like people want to have red, white, and rosé, and so people were asking us for it. And if you go to a UK supermarket, I'm sure all of you buy wine from independent merchants only. But if you did stumble into a supermarket wine aisle by accident, you would see it dominated by Provence style rosés, which are very light. Some verging on straw coloured, some, very, very, that style is pervasive on the whole of wine lists across the UK. And so that's what I tried to make in, we are going straight to 2017 was the first time we tried to make it. And we had this beautiful bottle. It's still one of my most liked posts on Instagram all these years later, of me holding it aloft against the Spanish sunshine, this beautiful, vibrant pink, looked like a bottle of shampoo or matey, if you remember back to matey days. And it was just glorious. It was this vibrant pink, and the wine tasted amazing. And we were like, we know this is going to become a fantastic wine. And then at the end of fermentation, it tasted absolutely awful. It fell apart completely. Nothing going on for it, and head in hands. What have we done? I can't believe we've let this happen. Racking our brains for why it happened. No idea. 12 months later, 2018, we did pretty much exactly the same thing, where we had this fabulous wine all the way through, beautiful coloured juice, beautiful flavours, and then it just didn't survive the fermentation process. Fell apart, collapsed, tasted awful. What are we doing wrong? So in 2019, we met up, me and the winemaking team out there. I took a couple of friends from the UK. We went out for this, this summit of we're going to drink rosé for a week and figure out what we're doing wrong. So we took out a load of rosés from the UK market, gathered up a load of rosés from the Spanish market, and looked at what we were trying to achieve, what was working, what wasn't working, and realized that all of the Spanish rosés that tried to be Provence rosés were absolutely bogging, and all of the Spanish rosés that just were honest to goodness Spanish Rosados were great. And the Provence wines were great, but they were from Provence and we weren't in Provence. And my winemaking friend at the parent winery, and I eat humble pie every time I say this, because he said, just make the wines you can make. And if you can't make a rosé you like here, then don't make rosé. There's a reason why certain wines come from certain regions. I can't make everything, so don't make everything. And he said, just make the best Rosado you can, and then see how it goes. And so we made this Rosado. Made it from Merlot because it was the fruitiest red grape we had. We processed it like a white wine. So it went into the white wine press, and we held it in the press only for as long as it took for us to fill the press, pressed it off, and then treated it like it was a white wine. But there's three things in life you can guarantee, which is death, taxes, and color in reds from Somontano. I mean, there's no avoiding it. So it was dark from the off, But the wine tasted great. And, you know, I had a mentor in Canada that always said, don't do analysis until you've tried it. Trust your palate. Don't look at numbers, because if you start chasing numbers, you're going to start making wine to fit those numbers and not your palate. You are making the wine, you're drinking the wine. That's what you've got to believe first. If it's the wrong numbers later, then the numbers are wrong, not you. Okay, so just work that way through. Made a wine that we loved, believed in, and we were quite excited about, but we launched it in December December 2019, which is the worst time to launch a rosé. But we sold a bit because it was, you know, people were buying the gift packs. And then 2020 started to swing into full force. And in April, everyone's locked down, everyone's stuck for, you know, something to do. And it was sunny. It was really sunny. And we managed to collar a few of the UK wine writers who couldn't go anywhere. So they were a captive audience for us. And we sent some out. And all of a sudden, there was this resurgence for a rosé that actually had some weight, actually had some power, actually had some flavour. People were firing up barbecues left, right, and centre. And the Provence rosés aren't going to go with that, you know, because it's just, they're going to fall over. They're great to start off with, but they're not going to sustain it. And we just found our niche. And for the first time since we've been going, we had a wine which outsold our house reds. We couldn't get it into the country fast enough. We couldn't keep up with demand. We started doing this daft trial, me and my wife, where we were looking for snacks at home that you could match with our wines. We discovered that bacon frazzles go with this Rosado. Bacon crispies, in my case, they were not even frazzles. We weren't even eating the proper frazzles. But that sweet, smoky barbecue, that just worked so well, and it took off. Fiona Beckett wrote about us. She put our bacon frazzle pairing in the blooming Guardian. It's just extraordinary. I mean, the lowest Guardian's ever sunk.
I don't know. I've seen some of their articles recently, but this to me, when I drink a glass of this back in that spring, exactly when we were talking about it, it was like I was at Wimbledon with strawberries and cream in a bowl, and that's just, you've got a little bit of this creaminess side, and the fruits, just with that red fruit from the Merlot, it just blasts you, and I think it's
strawberries,
delicious.
cream, bacon frazzles, and homeschooling. What more do you need?
And we're also hearing that the Iberico ham goes very well with it, which is good to know. So there's local pairing there.
It just handles it, and I love that. And I know it's not going to be for everyone, and I'm not going to push it down that road too far, because I know everyone's got their own opinions about rosé, but I love the fact that it goes with food. It makes me really happy. We're trying to drop the alcohol on it. We're trying to bottle lightning twice, but with a slightly lower alcohol content. But I'm over the moon. I'm absolutely thrilled to bits. And every time I go back to Spain, their head winemaker has an absolute field day with me and reminds me that it was his idea, not mine.
And I think that's fantastic, because a lot of people think that rosé is July and August, and that's it, because it's light, it's fresh, it's easy drinking. And something like this, because it's got that food pairing component, that weightiness about it, is the reason why you can drink rosé year round.
We've got some brilliant questions coming in and some really, really good feedback. People seem to be loving the wines. One of the comments is that it's a little bit like I can't quite read it. That Tavel wine, yeah. But slightly more acidic and just really good. We also have a question about how much you sell it for. And I think if I'm right, in a mixed six pack, is it $8.95?
So it depends where you buy it from, but we're I should have my salesman's hat on, I suppose, but we do sell it on our website, and I think that you're looking at, there's a few different outlets that stock us at the moment, a few different indie merchants. You're looking at about £8.95 to £9.5, £9.99 for our house wines. That's the range we're in, depending on where you're buying it. I'm obviously keen for people to buy off my website whenever they can, but I really like people buying it off independent wine merchants. You know, I mean, just make Paso the one that you always buy, and then go and see
So
more
what I'd
of the
say,
rest of the wine
if you
world.
need just Paso, go to the Paso website, get
Yeah.
it from Tom.
Tom's
If
got
you
some brilliant
if you
mixed
need
case
if you
deals.
need a mix and match, get a mix and match from us, and make sure there's a bottle of Paso in there.
That's how it should work, you see. And the UK is the best place in the world to drink wine. People are. I'm always amazed. When I was living in New Zealand, I couldn't believe that people got into wine when all they could drink was half a dozen Sauvignon Blancs from like 6 wineries down the road. And we don't take, if you get that 2 for a tenner meal from Marks and Spencer's, you get wine from Hungary. You don't moan that it's come from Hungary. You just fully expect that in the UK, and it's amazing. It's a wonderful country to drink wine in, and we should be really proud of
Wine
it.
on a 2 for a tenner meal, yeah.
I'm feeling like we should try a little bit of the red, for those who haven't already thought of it, because this has been your traditional biggest seller, and we've got a lot of fans of it in our wine merchant side. Loads of people seem to, in fact, including our normal producer Caroline, who
Buys it by the case.
buys it by the case of it, and so yeah, and it's recently won a medal at the International Wine Challenge.
Yeah, this is probably our most. It's won a few different things. It's a bronze medal winner, and I think it's a really good bronze medal winner for the. Obviously, I'm going to say that right, but without question, this is the most important wine that we do. There's it's recently dipped to about 55% of our business is this wine, and that's the lowest it's been since we started. Technically, we make we make better wines than this, and we've made wines that have won better awards than this wine has. But there is no wine that makes me happier than this wine. This is the journey to Spain after New Zealand. Me and my wife went to Canada for a few years, made wine in Canada, and again would have stayed there, but my God, it's cold. And so we were setting off, and we were going to leave Canada to go, and we wanted to make our own wines under our own label and in our own style. And what we were doing when we were sat around that kitchen table discussing what we wanted to do, minus 35 with the wind chill outside, so it's a bit biblical. What we kept going back to was we wanted to make a red wine. Everything else has come off the back of making the red wine, and what we wanted to do was make something that the sort of wine that we'd fallen in love with when we first started working for Tanners. The wine that we drank with each other when we went around to each other's houses, the wine that we could afford, but made us realize that we were excited about drinking wine. And for us, that always meant it was fruity, but complex, but not so complex that it didn't matter if you were having a pizza or a steak or you didn't have to think about your food, but there was enough complexity there to make you realize you've got something serious in your glass. This tannin structure was nice and supple and rich and rewarding, and sort of wine that you could open, drink the whole bottle of, and then have to reach for another one because you haven't really noticed the 2 glasses in between the start and the finish of that first bottle. And that approach to wine that was so important to me falling in love with wine in the first place was everything we wanted to encapsulate in our house reds. And when we set off, we didn't know where we were going to go. We had the Holy Trinity of Spain, France, and Italy written down, and we were like, we literally chose Spain because I had a GCSE in Spanish, and I'd been there on holiday a couple of times. I mean, that's how basic it got. But the goal was always to make this red wine that we wanted to drink at home, around the kitchen table with my parents or with our friends, and every year Paso-Primero Tinto is that wine, and we have that set checklist that we try and achieve, and that's why it's the most important wine to me. It's the wine I love to make. It's always the thing that we do first, and absolutely in love with it, and I love selling it. And we have customers up and down the UK, in Belgium and France and a few different places. Some customers have all of our wines, but all of our customers have this wine. And I think that speaks volumes.
Absolutely.
And I kind of think that's how we started, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
I got to know this wine because end of last year, I think, well, end of year before even, because we're in the new year now, Alex said he'd spoke to this bloke who was making some wine and would I like a bottle sent to me? And that was all I knew about it. And this bottle of wine turned up on my doorstep and I opened it and I didn't know what the price was, very much about it, what the history was. And I opened it and I said, this is great wine for the sheer fact that it doesn't sit in one place. You don't go, you must have this with dinner. You must have this with this. It's so versatile that you can have a case at home if you want to open it because you just want a glass because you're watching TV. If you've got friends round, if we're ever allowed to have friends round again, and people who like Cab will like it. People who like Rioja will like it. People who like a Malbec will like it. It's a really safe bet, which is what wine should be about. You don't always have to have a million pages of tasting notes and this. I go, I want to open this with my mates and I want to drink it and it's going to be phenomenal. And
I think it's important to say that a safe bet, for what we mean by that is it's not a safe wine where safe choices have been made. Like, we've tried to make it just as simple. This has the complexity.
But delicious for everybody.
Going on. It's delicious. But there's nothing. The balance is so good in it, and it doesn't need you to have it with a really fatty, greasy steak with loads of salt and things.
But you can.
But you can. Exactly. Yeah. So,
but not bacon frazzles. That's for the rosé.
I wish I could film that and just roll that out to people because that's exactly what we're trying to go for, and that's how I drank red wine when I started drinking red wine. And I think everything we do comes from a drinker's perspective before it's a winemaker's perspective. That's really important to me in how we approach things. And everything we do is designed for me and my wife to drink it, which is
and that's great because with my background, there's a lot of things out there that you go, this is a Somm wine, which generally means it's a bit weird, a bit quirky, and I wouldn't drink loads of it. This is just a really cool wine.
And I should say that I mean, this is again a massive blend that is born out of our approach to winemaking, which is to pick small batches and process every small batch of the vineyard as if it's going to be its own wine in its own right. And that's what gives us the dexterity when we're blending to make decisions and create new things. So this is actually 5 grapes, Cabernet Sauvignon. It's Merlot dominant, I have to say. The Merlot is drifting a little bit over recent years, but that's a big component of what we do. There's a bit of Tempranillo in there, which if people say that it's tastes Spanish and then I tell them it's Tempranillo, they say, oh, that's it. There's about 7% Tempranillo. So if you're picking it, you're a better man than me. Garnacha as well is a good grape for us in Somontano. Gives us a real berry characteristic. And then Syrah, which is the dark horse, which has really come through in the last couple of years to really give us that velvety texture on the finish. But I suppose the thing that I get from all of the reds in Somontano, and if I was to talk to someone on the Somm program or an MW course, the hallmark of all Somontano reds is cherry, and we cover the whole gamut from sort of dark chocolate, Black Forest Gatto style cherries, right through to super sweet glacé cherries. That's what Somontano reds do so well. And since I started working out there, we've lent into that. I love that cherry portfolio. I think that flavor profile is something that's very unique to us, and I'm really proud of it. I think it's something to lean into and really embrace. There's bramble characteristics and other things as well, but that gives us a bit of freshness, and whilst also having that sort of sweet, indulgent character, even though they're all dry wines.
No, absolutely. And from talking about food and wine pairings, Alex had mentioned something about cook-offs with other Spanish winemakers. What's that all about?
Well, this started with a drunken,
that's when it all starts.
over the years, I've been discussing how wonderful England is for food, and how British cuisine is some of the best cuisine in the world. And obviously, I'm fighting a losing battle against the Spaniards because, there's a Spanish tapas bar on every high street in the UK. There isn't a UK restaurant on every high street in Spain. And we started having this, it's been back and forth a while, but this was the first harvest this year where I was stuck, and I knew when I set off, because we were in the midst of a global pandemic, that I was stuck in Spain for 8 weeks. And so the conversation on our first day was like, well, what are you going to eat while you're out here? Because normally I would come back and forth and try and do a couple of weeks, then come home and go back and split my time. This time I was locked into Spain, and they said, right, well, I think you're going to have to cook for us if you're going to be cooking English food. And this challenge evolved. And the first thing I cooked was a curry, obviously, the most British.
The classic English food.
Oh, to go with that Riesling Gewürztraminer.
And it just, because I put quite a lot of effort into that first meal, I'd made naans from scratch for the first time ever in my life, and did a 2.5 course meal. But then the Spanish one-upmanship kicked in, and the cellar then descended into this world where we were working 6 days a week. We have Sundays off, very religious in Spain, and which I quite like, knowing I'm having a day off. It's very kids. But for 6 days a week, very quickly it became regimented, where even the boss of the owner was coming in, and he cooked. He cooked on Tuesdays. I was cooking on Wednesdays. The winemaker, we had our days, and it became this. It was utterly glorious. We were trying to outdo each other, and it culminated in the end of harvest feast, where I did Welsh rarebit starter, followed by a full roast dinner, and apple crumble with custard to finish. Just to fully.
Did you convert all these Spaniards? They've got to come over to find a pub, and
it was amazing. The thing that really converted them was, so our end of harvest meal was this roast dinner where we drank liters of gin and carver. God, it was just very, very messy. And then the day after, the hangover day, was my last day in Spain, and I picked up some proper English cheddar, some good French baguettes, and made these epic sandwiches with thinly sliced roast beef, the leftover gravy, some proper English cheddar on, toast them in the grill, served them up with a couple of bottles of chilled red wine, and everyone, that was just sent everyone, waved off, headed off into the distance. Thank you very much. But now it's got competitive, and I've got barbecue chefs contacting me on Instagram asking me to come out to Spain so they could cook in the vines and get involved in the UK versus Spain cook-off.
That's amazing.
That's going to be great. And for anyone who doesn't follow Tom on social media, do pop onto Twitter in particular, and is that, I think that's where you're most active, isn't it?
Twitter and Instagram are the two things that I enjoy spending time. Twitter for the wine industry is phenomenal. I think it's absolutely great.
I've got to persuade him, but yeah, you get the proper behind the scenes view of what people are thinking, and what's going on in the winery, and it's a great little insight. And people, James Arrow is saying he's really enjoying hearing the story behind your wines, which is really cool. We did have a really good question, I think, as we move on to wine number 5, which was that when you're doing this kind of like, what can we make this year? I've done lots of different press fractions, lots of different vineyards, and you've got all these different component wines. You're trying to make the best thing. How does that work with your sort of ongoing identity, and like people who bought last year's Paso Tinto, and will they get the similar sort of thing the next year?
Yeah. Or? So the process to make the wines initially is we're trying to make the best versions that we possibly can do of our house wines. I think we've found our style with our everything that's, I don't know if it shows up, everything with these are our house wines. We have red, white, and rosé under that ladder. And what we're trying to do is we make vintage wines, but we don't want them to. By using the blend, there's an opportunity to iron out the creases in the variation between the years. We want to embrace the fact that they're vintage wines, but we want them to be a stylistic. We want them to be a continuation of style. So we want you to be able to pick up our Paso-Primero Tinto, Blanco, or Rosado from you guys or from someone up in Manchester or wherever it may be, and know roughly what you're going to get. So if you buy, if you were to taste the 16 next to the 17 next to the 18 of our house red, for example, what I really want is for you to know that they're different wines, but the tasting note that you write to be vaguely similar. I want that circle of variation to be as small as possible, while still embracing the fact that every year it tastes a little bit different. That's the plan with the house wines. Everything that's come above that is completely vintage led, and we want that to be how the winery works. I don't want to be I made wine for a winery in New Zealand. Well, I made wine for a winery in Canada where we were given a bottle of wine and told to make that wine again, and that bottle was from 14 years before I'd got there. But they were selling to a supermarket or selling to the LCBO in Canada's case, and so they have they sell shelf space. They don't supermarkets don't like variation in their products, so they want the wine to be the same every time. This is why Yellowtail and people like that do so well, because there's no variation. You can speak ill of people like Yellowtail, but if I was in a certain situation, I want my £5 wine to taste the same every time. I want to know that it's a safe purchase. That's if I'm buying that wine, that's the world I'm in. So I understand it.
Yeah, and it's the line of commodity, isn't it?
Absolutely.
If Carlsberg tasted different every time you bought it, you wouldn't be buying it.
Yeah. That is in the wine world, and people don't often talk about it or accept it. Everyone thinks every bottle of wine should be bottled poetry or bottled sunshine, whatever, however you want to describe it. It's not the case. It's not how most wine's drunk. And so I understood where the winery was coming from, but I am now my own boss. I don't have to live in that world. I have to make a business, so I have to have Paso-Primero taste roughly similar, because they're the wines that pay for the way of the last wine you're going to try, which is Pasotismo, which is, it's absolutely bonkers how that wine was made. There's so much that's gone into it. We'll never
get it in the glass for anyone who hasn't.
Yeah, for anyone who hasn't, that is a very good cue to go on to wine number 5. So all of those three, the Blanco, the Rosado, and the Tinto, those are all the same price.
Yeah,
that's right, isn't it? So they're all sub £10 pretty much. So give us the occasional 50p for profit in the shop, But,
not that much.
But yeah, I think they are all great value. But like you say, having the Prima and having this Pasotismo gives you that chance to make something really different and really cool. So this is a very different wine. Do you want to talk us a bit about the process for this one?
Yeah. So you had the Paso-Prima in the white earlier on, the 2019 Paso-Prima, and that Paso-Prima project started in 2015, and it leads on quite nicely from talking about that supermarket wine, where I'd worked in cellars where we would get fruit come in from parts of the vineyard. I'm like, this is amazing. We're going to make an amazing wine. We have to make 60,000 bottles of Sauvignon Blanc this year. Everything goes in there. We have to make 200,000 bottles of this. Everything goes in there. And you'd lose amazing parcels of fruit or amazing wines or amazing barrels. And in 2015, we had this amazing parcel of I've lost my thread. We had this amazing parcel of Cabernet Sauvignon in 2015, which was too good. I hate to use this phrase, too good to lose into Paso-Primero Tinto, but it was unique. It was different. So we turned it into its own wine, and we realized that we were our bosses. We can make our own label. So if there was something unique, we'll just make a wine around that. And that's what we did in 2015. Then it happened again in 16 with a Chardonnay. Then in 17 we did a Garnacha Cab, and we're on this theme then of making a Paso-Prima every year that was unique, different, special, or something that tasted like the year it was from. And then in 18 we had this. The parent winery were starting to invest in me as a winemaker and give me some more toys to play with. And we had 8 puncheons that had been, which are big barrels, 500-litre barrels, which have been doctored to suit red wine making. So they had a door on the top or a door on the end, or in ideal circumstances, a door on both. And we were able to ferment reds in oak for the first time. And we had 8 barrels. We had 4 grape varieties. So we did 2 barrels of Cabernet Sauvignon, 2 barrels of Merlot, 2 barrels of Garnacha, and 2 barrels of Syrah. And we're having fun. We were winemakers. We had the bulk. We had the large volume wine that we were making in the corner. Then we had these toys to play with, and they tasted great. We were so excited, and we had these 8 barrels, which condensed into 4 barrels, and then that condensed into 2,000 bottles. And we're just running away with ourselves, getting really giddy and excited. We had this amazing wine. It had never been in anything other than oak, from vine to oak, and we put it straight into bottle. And that was Prima. We knew that was going to be Prima from that year. It was everything that we'd done. And we sat down, and over the course of 6 months, we started drinking it. And we liked it, and we enjoyed it, and we started drinking it. And the owner of the parent winery, his son had it as his wedding wine, unlabeled, because they loved it so much. We were really excited about this wine. And then we knew that it was going to be Prima. And they were like, I wonder if we could do this again. I wonder if we could because we'd never been able to make a Prima twice, which is why we had never been able to replicate the wines we'd made before. I'm like, if we can replicate this wine, what do? We've got no label for it. This is much better than our Tinto. It's something unique. This is when we discovered that there was a level above what we'd been doing before that we could put a label on. We'd made it together. It was me and the head winemaker of Batán de Salas, our parent winery. And so this idea from 2018 evolved into a collaboration wine. It's the first wine that I've released in conjunction with Batán de Salas. So the 2 wineries were both listed on the back label. They sell it in Spain and their markets. I sell it in my markets. We work together on absolutely every part of it. It is those 4 grapes. 19 is so different. 19's in the same ballpark, but there's concrete and all sorts in the 19. But this project has been born, and it's essentially a reserva version of our house reds. A little bit special, a little bit more of everything, really. But to me, this was the turning point in our relationship, going from me renting space to me being part of their story. And they've invested huge amounts of money this year. We're turning everything, we're becoming a much more quality focused collaboration project, really. And it all comes down to Pasotismo. This wine in your glass, it's a really exciting thing for me. I love this wine to bits. It's very limited, to the point where I'm not drinking it tonight. Which is
We've got. If you do, you want us to go and get a bottle just because to show the back label is quite cool.
Yeah, well, that
shows
now
you precisely the dates that the grapes were picked and went into which barrels they went, and how then that's all blended back together.
We were trying to figure out how to write the story I've just told you in English and Spanish on a back label. We just couldn't do it. So we've got a graphic designer to do a back label, which has the schematics of the dates, everything was picked, every time the barrel was filled, and that it's basically going to be a fold-out brochure on the 2019 because we've got stuff all over the place. But to me, this is what the beauty of setting this company up and having the freedom to work for myself, and having the ability to pivot and turn quite quickly. This is the wine that we were able to achieve. I couldn't do this if I was selling to supermarkets. I couldn't do this if I had to fulfill a certain order. It's because we were able to be there in the cellar and go, you know what, this tastes great. We should just do this. We should just do this. And that is what I've always wanted, that freedom to be able to, follow the group. People always ask me about the skills as a winemaker. I think the most important skill as a winemaker is to not get in the way of the grapes. Your job is to taste that fruit from the vineyards and at every stage of the process, and to make the best decisions to not stop it being the best thing it can be. And that I'm still learning, I'm still figuring it all out, but I love that idea of getting the best out of something, trying a barrel and thinking, I can't wait for this to be in a pouch in someone's front room in the Cotswolds.
One of the craziest things that I don't think people really grasp, that when you become a winemaker, it's great if you've been following your parents through your family-owned estate and you've watched them do these things. If you come into this as a second career, or a little bit later in life, you sit there and you go, it's not like making beer. You have only this is the schematic, but you only have one time a year to make wine, and so you can look at how many chances you've got to get this right, and it's not that many. So it's a get it wrong. Scary thing. Yeah, and lots to get wrong. You're talking about the barrels or the puncheons with the big doors in to basically allow you to put the grapes in and to get them out again at the end. One of the first massively impressive mistakes I made was doing a Merlot in basically a demijohn that was designed for making white wine. And I somehow managed to shove them all into this very, very narrow thing at the top of it. And I filled it about as high as I could. And he knows what's about to come next. First thing, as it generates all of the carbon dioxide, it pushes all of the grape skins up to the top, and suddenly they're over the roof of your garage. And the next thing is you finish the ferment, and all the grapes are stuck in this damn thing, and you can't get them out again. So, yeah, it's that sort of practical side, that there are some really big differences in the kit you use between red and white winemaking. And I've seen that Tom's got loads more smaller barrels this year with special doors cut into.
Oh yeah, we really all sorts of tricks and things and exciting things in the cellar. Your story reminds me of. We used to dish out beer fines to harvest interns who, if you did something wrong, you had to contribute beer to the winery fridge. And we had samples, fermenting samples in water bottles from every tank in the winery. So probably about 50 water bottles in the lab. And so obviously it's fermenting juice. So all these samples were laid out for me and the head winemaker to taste, with the lids not on. And a harvest intern went into the lab and put all the lids on and screwed all the lids on to these fermenting. And about 2 hours later, we walked into the lab and it was just absolutely drenched.
Yeah. Presumably, just for the people who couldn't work out what happened next, they all exploded, presumably with glass everywhere and tops blown off. But yeah,
that beer fridge was pretty full that weekend.
No, there are some great stories. I think one of the questions, which I'm going to be a bit cheeky, have you ever made any of those kind of intern errors, and what's the funniest one that you've done?
The worst, going back to New Zealand, one of the worst mistakes was topping a tank. So I was going from one tank to another via a pump, and the owner happened to be walking by, and I'd made a bit of a name for myself by this point. People liked me, and he was showing some people around, and I was topping a tank, and I just finished topping it as I was talking to him. And I went to turn the press off and the pump off, and I turned the pump on full volume. And so in front of him and all his friends, juice started spraying out the top of this tank after he told everyone how good I was and how excited they were that I was going to work for them for the next 12 months.
Brilliant. Let's go back to Somontano. It's not a region that I think is that well known in Spain, but it seems to be really on the up now. There are some wineries putting in some pretty impressive buildings, some good architecture coming up. Is it a region that people should really keep their eye on?
Well, I apologise immensely because I was supposed to submit some photos and maps and things, which was our conversation 3-4 days ago. Given the week that I've had, I completely forgot within half an hour. But yeah, Somontano is a difficult region to get a finger on. There is some big money there. There's 4 really impressive wineries that are colossal in stature. Gonzalez Baez, one of the biggest conglomerates companies in Spanish wine. They
Very
own
big in sherry.
Venus del Vero. And there's some big numbers, some big places about. It is suffering a little bit from this bulk production idea, but there's some really, really good wines there. And I've sort of tapped into it at the right time, I think, in that it was a very accessible region when I started, and now we're starting to see some pockets really emerge where there's some phenomenal wines. It's a tricky one to track in the UK. I don't know how many people have got Somontano wines. Our goal, I mean, this is a lofty ambition, but we want, in the next couple of years, we want to be making the best wine in Somontano. The collaboration series, that level of Pasotismo, we've got a new wine coming out with Batan de Salas this year. That's our focus. We really want to put our flag in the sand and say that we're making the most interesting wines in Somontano, and then hopefully we can be part of this phenomenal resurgence of Spanish wines, which I don't know if it's been played out in the mainstream English market yet, but Spanish wine is really exciting. I think it's one of the most phenomenal countries for young winemakers and emerging regions, and I'm really excited. I really hope that we can become a part of it. We're doing our best to put our heads above the parapet.
For sure.
So yeah, you mentioned that, and Somontano, obviously. Where else do you think are these up and coming regions? Because I think we talk about Rioja a little bit. Priorat's got some name for itself, but outside of that, what else? You know,
Rias Baixas.
You know, Humia's making some stuff, but
well, I for me, I'm quite local in terms of the people that I know and the people that we're using as influences. There's some amazing producers around Zaragoza, which is not a traditional wine growing region, but there's some good hills, some good mountains around Zaragoza, and there's some people making some really interesting things there. And the outskirts of Navarra, I think there's some brilliant pockets of glorious wines being made there. And obviously, Bierzo was probably, at the time when I was drinking that in Canada, that was, I thought that was hipster. That's mainstream now, but those wines are absolutely stunning.
It's very, very interesting you say that, because I was on a Zoom call with the wineries of Javier Sanz this morning from Rueda, and I asked Bertan, who's their export director, where she thinks is an up and coming, hidden away region that not a lot of people know about, and she was Bierzo and great wines made from Mencia.
Such good value. I mean, just beautiful wines. And as with anything, I mean, if you're looking for wines where there's a new wave coming through, you have to avoid the mainstream money pockets. And so the central Rioja regions aren't going to be where the big changes are happening, because they've perfected what they're doing. And quite rightly, those wines are really expensive. The people that have learned their skills there and have gone off to find a new home are going to be on the outskirts of these things. And luckily, Spain has a phenomenal climate and a phenomenal geology to it, and a huge difference. I had no idea how different a country like Spain. Spain was just hot to me, because I just grew up going to Alicante and thinking it was just cheap beer and swimming pools.
I think you've just preempted the introduction video to our Spanish tasting, because we looked at this and we were saying how we all have gone down to the Costa del Sol, but there's a 15-degree difference in average temperature at the peak of summer between between Santander and the south coast. That's huge. So of course you can make completely different wines up in the north than you can in the south.
Well, I quite like the fact that
Degree
the,
difference.
the people I hang out with, the ones
Variation.
I hang out with, say, I can't believe you've got Spanish restaurants, because how could you have a Spanish restaurant? Just can't get their heads around the fact that you could lump the whole country into one cuisine. And it's only from being out there and traveling around a bit that I realized that that's really, really true. We have this little view of what tapas should be, but it's so different. You just step across Galicia and you think, oh my God, this is such a different place. Amazing. I love it. And
Yeah.
the wines are thankfully following suit, because I think they struggle for a long time. Whether or not it was just accessibility to the new wave, or
Spanish wines.
it seems to be really finding its feet now.
Tempranillo. That's Italian.
Absolutely. I might just go over to the computer for a second.
Yes. Spanish. That's Italian. No, it isn't. Tempranillo. Oh, I think it's Italian. No.
Well, Alex is just playing on the computer again. But yeah, it's been absolutely fantastic. It's been an absolute insight. So I think if you've got any final questions, get them in the chat. But what's next for Paso-Primero? What are we looking at? What's happening? What's going to take over the world? Apart from be the best wine in Somontano.
I'm hoping the next thing is I get to Spain. It's been a really tough week. I'm very fortunate. A tough week for me is not. I haven't been badly affected by the touch wood, all the rest of it. But I've had a really, really tough week with my plan. I should be in Spain right now, and I'm not in Spain. I'm hoping to get out there soon. But the jewel in our crown, the thing that we're most excited about, is we picked up a vineyard of Moristel. Moristel, not a great variety that most people have heard of. A lot of people in Somontano haven't heard of it either. I think we picked up a vineyard this year, which is from 1976, and it's our first opportunity to have a naturally lower alcohol reds. So we should be in the 13 and a bit bracket. It's indigenous grape variety to our region. It's something that Somontano has grown for a very, very long time, but hasn't really broken beyond its borders. And I think it's going to be probably the most exciting wine that we've been involved with. It's going to be Pasotismo level. It's going to be something that's, we're putting a lot into it. After the harvest we had last year, which was easily the best harvest we've ever had in terms of quality, in terms of style, in terms of everything that we did, the processes, we were much more focused on hand picking, hand processing, hand harvesting. We've ramped up the quality in everything we're doing. And even through all of that, this little pocket of Moristel really stood out. And I think it might, we've built up a little bit of a reputation, but we've made pretty safe wines so far. This is an opportunity for us to really stand out and show that, look, we're really focused on what we're doing. I'm hoping that wine will really strike a chord with a lot of people.
No, fantastic. And it's always exciting to see new things being made, new things growing, new things into the market, because it's nice to be able to go, if you like this, give this a go, try something different. So I think the important thing is, where's your website so people can buy your wine? Because we're at Tring.wine if you need other bits, but if you just need Paso, where are we going to get it from?
So we are Paso-Primero.com, and there's a hyphen between Paso and Primero, and that hyphen. So we were going to be Paso-Primero.com, but that was going to cost £35,000 to get that website. Paso-Primero.com was $395. So we've gone with the hyphen, and we are Paso-Primero. Roughly translates as first step, which is these wines are our first step. So everything comes back to Paso. Paso_Primero on Twitter, I think. Paso-Primero, all one word, on Instagram. Hopefully you'll find us. I worry that my Google searches are very favoured toward. Every time I type Paso in, it takes me to my own website. But
and that's good. And the hyphen means the wines could be house wines could be under 10 quid rather than over 50 quid.
can you imagine,
Not paying for the website.
they keep it. The people who own it keep. They email me every year and say, "Oh, we see that you've got paso-primero.com. Would you like paso-primero.com? We'll give it to you for 25 grand." I'm all right,
Not this year. But anyway, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been insightful. Some absolutely fantastic wines. And I hope everyone learned a little bit, learned a lot. But as I always say, it's the stories that make the wine, and your enthusiasm, your insight, how exciting it is really, really cool. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, thanks.
We wish you the very, very best of luck with all your next wines, and we can't wait to come out and actually do another tasting in the vineyards.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, honestly, you guys are doing a really good job, and you should be so proud of this. This has been something in my mind for the last God knows how long, and you've managed to bring it to fruition. So you guys should be really happy with what you're doing, and you should be really proud. I think it's amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, take care, guys.
Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Cheers.
Bye-bye.